this evening for the session on the Hamilton Official Plan Review. So my name's Tracy, Tracy L., and I'm a facilitator, and I want to welcome everybody again and officially now to the first of 2 virtual open houses for the Official Plan Review. The focus of tonight will be on the proposed updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan to ensure its conformity with provincial land use planning policies, as well as proposed policy and zoning bylaw changes to address Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. So lots of information to share with you tonight. And again, the session is being recorded, so if you happen to miss something, you are more than welcome to revisit when it's posted on the project website. So we have 2 hours together. Myself and my colleague Jody, we are the time and process keepers. We are hoping to create a positive space where you get as much information as possible, including answering your questions and hearing your ideas within the constraints of this particular format. But nevertheless, the format is that there's short presentations followed by questions and answers. So we won't have people sitting and listening for a very long time before your opportunity will be to jump in with your questions and ideas. And in order to do that in real time tonight, you'll be using the Q&A button. And when you push that, it pops up a little screen where you can put your questions and ideas in there. And myself and Jody will be monitoring that Q&A box, and we'll be grouping similar questions and paraphrasing for efficiency and doing our very best to get the gist of all of the questions and comments. As I noted before the session started, some of you may have already also written in your questions, and we'll be integrating those into the session as well. The session presentation that you see here on the screen, the recording, the Q&A document, which will be generated, and an overall consultation report will be posted on Engage Hamilton, and you can see the web address there. And in case you've missed any of the previous rounds, you can also go after this session and acquaint yourself with that information as well from the past. Any questions, comments, or ideas that come up after the session, you can email the project team at grids2-mcr@hamilton.ca at any point in time. Okay, next slide, please. And I just want to introduce everybody to the project team. These are the Hamilton experts who will be either presenting directly or certainly jumping in to answer questions for you. We have Heather Travis, who's the Senior Project Manager. Hello, Heather. It's nice to see you. We have Delia McPhail, who's a policy planner and who will be leading us in much of the presentation. We have Lauren, who is a policy planner and who has been coordinating this whole session for us, which is wonderful. And Christine Newbold, who is the manager of that section, and so much more. Hello, Christine. In the zoning and committee of adjustment area, we have people from the zoning reform team. Alana Fulford is here, and she's a planner. And we also have the manager, Shannon McKee, who has joined. And then you see my picture in the days when I'm more rested. There, and my colleague Jody Ball is also joining, and between Jody and I will be facilitating and documenting all of the action tonight. So just in terms of the agenda, what you'll hear, you can see on the slide what we plan to cover. It's divided up into 3 sections. We'll begin with an introduction to the Municipal Comprehensive Review of the city's urban and rural Hamilton official plans, briefly highlighting the legislative requirements and Council's direction on managing growth. We'll also talk about the approach taken by staff to conduct the review of the city's official plan. So then when we get to section 2, we'll move on to reviewing highlights of the proposed changes on a topic by topic basis and taking time to answer questions as we go. So the topics are grouped thematically, and we'll hear about 5 minutes on each one, and then we'll do Q&A. And then lastly, in section 3, we'll share with you the next steps in this first phase of the official plan review. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Delia McPhail. As I mentioned, she's a policy planner, and she's going to provide a brief overview of why the city is reviewing its official plans, how we got to this point, and where we'll be going from here. So over to you, Delia.
Thank you, Tracy. Based on the requirements of the provincial policy statement and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe and good land use planning practice, municipalities review their official plans on a regular basis to ensure they remain up to date, reflect current provincial policy, and represent the long-term vision for the municipality. The Rural Hamilton Official Plan and Urban Hamilton Official Plan were approved by the Ontario Municipal Board and came into effect in 2012 and 2013, respectively. The Municipal Comprehensive Review is the means by which municipalities update official plans to ensure conformity with recently updated provincial land use planning policies. Unlike other official plan amendments adopted by Council that are exempt, official plan amendments that implement the Municipal Comprehensive Review require the approval of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Concurrently with completing the MCR, the City has been completing an update to its growth management strategy known as GRIDS 2 to plan for provincially forecasted population and job growth to the year 2051. The slide on the screen identifies the different interrelated components of the MCR and GRIDS 2 processes. Many of the studies that are required as part of the MCR are also part of a growth strategy. The outcome of the MCR and GRIDS 2 will be implemented through official plan amendments to the urban and rural Hamilton official plans, which is what we are discussing today. In November 2021, through GRIDS 2 and the MCR, Council approved a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario to accommodate all forecasted population and employment growth within the existing urban area to the year 2051. As part of this Municipal Comprehensive Review, this conformity amendment implements the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario by removing current policies and mapping that would allow for a future urban boundary expansion and to plan for and manage growth within the existing urban area. Changes to the city's existing low-density residential zones are also proposed and will be discussed later in the presentation. The province has set July 1, 2022 as the deadline for municipalities to submit official plan amendments to bring their official plans into conformity with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Therefore, the city has taken a phased approach to the review of the city's official plans. We are currently in Phase 1, which involves the review of the Urban Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with the provincial land use planning policies. This phase also includes changes to both the urban and rural Hamilton official plans necessary to implement Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Phase 2 will involve the review of the rural Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with the provincial policy statement, the Greenbelt Plan, and the Niagara Escarpment Plan. It will also involve refinements to the agricultural and natural heritage system mapping. Phase 3 will be the review of the urban and rural Hamilton official plans dealing with local matters such as urban design, waste management, parks and recreation. Updates tied to the residential zoning project, as well as further updates related to implementing Council's direction for a no urban boundary growth scenario, will also be included in this third phase. The fourth and final phase would include the delineation of major transit station areas and associated density targets along the B line, and the possibility of inclusionary zoning policies to further support the development of affordable housing. As the provincial land use planning policy framework comprises a wide range of matters, the City has approached the review of the official plans on a topic basis in light of policy updates to the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. By organizing updates on a topic area basis, we were able to identify official plan policies that already conform with provincial policies, as well as those policies that require updating to conform to provincial policies. Before we get into the details of the proposed updates, I would like to provide an opportunity to answer any questions you may have about the Municipal Comprehensive Review that I've just provided.
And I'll jump in here and just let you know that there are a few questions here. The first one we'll take from the real-time feed here, which is regarding the existing and/or in-progress secondary plans for Ancaster and Waterdown, which represent their distinctiveness and sense of place. And how will these how will this process affect the secondary plans?
Well, to answer that question, the secondary plans areas are not to be affected by zoning changes at this time. Yeah, so that the zoning changes we'll get to further off in the presentation, but perhaps Christine or Heather would like to answer that question further.
Yeah, thanks, Delia. Yeah, just to confirm, so right now the changes that we're making are to Volume 1 of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan, and we're not proposing any changes at present to the secondary plans. If that were to occur in the future, where we decide to look at secondary plans and review them or update them in any way, that would be a separate process and would have separate public consultation associated with that process.
And I'll just add that the Waterdown secondary plan that's currently in process has not yet been presented to Council. That will be happening next month. But those policies of those secondary plans have been reviewed and to ensure provincial plan conformity.
Thank you. Now, I know later in the presentation we have timelines for next steps here with this phase, but is there approximate timelines, including the dates for all of the phases that you spoke of?
I'll let Heather speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, we did bring forward a staff report when we presented this information to Council earlier this year. And we identified phases 2 and 3 to be brought forward to Council in Q1 2023, so early next year. And then phase 4, which is would be dealing with that major transit station area planning, we have identified for Q2 in 2023, so a little bit later next year. Those timelines are tentative and are somewhat dependent, particularly in the case of the major transit station area planning, with ensuring that we do have all of the information we need about the LRT project, including detailed design, station stop locations, etc., to allow us to proceed with that phase of work. But in general, we're looking at early next year for phases 2 and 3 to proceed.
Thank you. And where do MTSAs factor into the phases of the official plan update? And does it include the entire network or only segments of it?
So the major transit station area updates, as I mentioned, would be has been identified for the final phase of our OP review, and that is simply because we need the time to ensure, as I said, we have all the appropriate information about the LRT project, so that we can ensure that we're planning for the correct station areas. along the line. It will encompass the entire, the major transit station areas that we're talking about as part of that particular project are the ones that are identified as being along the priority transit corridor in the provincial growth plan. And for Hamilton, that includes the stations along our LRT line. So those are the ones that are identified as major transit station areas. In addition to that, our GO stations, existing and future GO stations, are also major transit station areas and would be included in that review and any future inclusionary zoning policies that the city might proceed with in the future.
Thanks, Heather. I believe I have to take us back to the secondary plan quickly here, the secondary plans. And does it mean that the neighborhood zoning changes that are potentially coming wouldn't apply to the neighborhoods until the secondary plans are amended?
That's correct.
Okay, awesome. And there's just a couple more here that were submitted earlier that I'll get to. Somebody's asked a question about why the questions aren't appearing on the screen. And with this WebEx platform, they're coming to the project team. So whatever you're submitting is coming to this group that you see across the top here. And I commit to, while I may not read your questions verbatim, to try and work as many in as possible. And I'm just gonna, an experience already that's here is, somebody's asked a question and then they've clarified. And in previous sessions, people have, written back in if I haven't captured their thought exactly. So please feel free to do that. It's one of the quirks of this particular platform. And I was just saying to one of my colleagues, I miss people and being in person where we could do a bit more of that interaction. But anyway, I'll go to the submitted questions. And the first one is whether staff and counselors will be honoring the no boundary expansion with this work.
I guess I'll take a shot at that one too. I can certainly respond on behalf of staff and note that this amendment and these future zoning changes that we are bringing forward right now are honoring that council no urban boundary expansion decision. Delia will be going over later in the presentation the details of how the amendments that we are bringing forward are implementing that council decision as a first stage, and there will be future amendments as well to further implement that council direction.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we can move on to section 2. It's where all the action is, I feel like, or a good chunk of it is in there.
Okay, so we would like to now take you through some of the notable updates to the official plans based on the topic areas identified. In most cases, we've grouped similar topics together for discussion purposes. We would now like to begin with highlighting proposed updates within the provincial plans, housing, and employment topic areas. The first topic area we wish to discuss is that of provincial plans. In 2015, the province of Ontario began what is known as the coordinated review of its provincial planning policy documents. Following this review in 2017, the province updated the Greenbelt Plan, the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Since that time, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe was further updated in 2019 and again in 2020. The current provincial policy statement was released in 2020. Updates to the Urban Hamilton official plan include policy references to the updated provincial plans and a mapping correction within Volume 1. Within Volume 2, secondary plans, policy and mapping changes to the Fruitland-Winona secondary plan and land use plan are necessary to reflect lands that were removed from the Greenbelt plan through the coordinated review. Other mapping changes to implement Greenbelt Plan mapping changes will occur through Phase 2 of the Official Plan Review and the Rural Hamilton Official Plan Conformity Amendments and Updates. Finally, there are a series of glossary updates to reflect new and revised provincial definitions. New definitions include such terms as impact of a changing climate, green infrastructure, low impact development, and complete streets, among others. While some definitions were updated to provide further clarification, such as adding motorized mobility devices to the term active transportation. Let's now move on to the housing topic area. Policy updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan that fall under the housing topic area include updates to reflect the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, updated housing targets for affordable rental housing units, and new ownership housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households, including housing with supports. Other updates include planning for a mix of housing forms, types, and densities to meet market-based and affordable housing needs of current and future residents, as well as encouraging the creation of family-sized dwelling units, those with a higher number of bedrooms in multiple dwellings. A policy that has been added to address the PPS policy requires the city to maintain the ability to accommodate residential growth for a minimum of 15 years through residential intensification and redevelopment within the city's urban area. And where new development is to occur, there should be zoning in place to facilitate residential intensification to meet a 3-year supply of available residential units. The residential intensification criteria provided in Chapter B is proposed to be expanded to address such matters as transit supportive development and sustainable design elements, as well as references to existing or planned active transportation, and the availability of and location of existing and proposed public community facilities. Given Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario and the need to accommodate all projected population growth within the urban area, additional policy updates to facilitate residential intensification throughout the urban area will be included in the discussion of the urban structure topic area. The last topic area within this section is that of employment. The growth plan has introduced a new term, provincially significant employment zones. Many of the city's existing employment areas are classified as provincially significant employment zones. The policy updates therefore identify these and map these areas while recognizing that all employment areas contribute to the local economy. New policies encourage the efficient use and intensification of existing employment areas to increase employment densities and connections with active transportation. The growth plan has also required the city to establish minimum employment density targets broken down by employment designation. The city's employment density targets will plan to achieve an overall density of 29 jobs per hectare by the year 2051. The proposed draft OPA includes mapping and policy changes to implement the employment land conversions previously approved by Council in August 2020, as the conversion of employment land to non-employment designations may only be converted through a municipal comprehensive review. Finally, the provincial policy statement has introduced new land use compatibility requirements between employment and sensitive land uses, requiring that they be planned and developed to avoid and minimize risk to public health and safety, and to include new requirements related to land use compatibility studies. At this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the provincial plans, housing, or employment topic area updates.
Okay, thank you. And we do have some, and they appear to be mostly focused so far on the housing area. So the first one is, what is the existing housing stock in terms of units in the Hamilton built boundary?
Thanks, Tracy. This is a question that had come in prior to the open houses, so it did allow us to gather this data and have it ready for this particular question. So in terms of our existing housing stock within our built-up area, we're at about 55% low density, which is about 110,000 or so single family and semi-detached dwellings. 11% medium density, which is townhouses, and so it equates to about 21,000 units, and 34% high density or apartments, which equates to about 69,000 apartment units, for a total of about 203,000 units altogether.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just finish that, those questions that came in that bundle. How much growth in terms of units, population, and jobs need to be accommodated in the existing urban area with no urban expansion?
So within our existing urban area, we would be planning to accommodate growth of approximately 110,000 dwelling units to the year 2051, which equates to a population of approximately 236,000 additional people and about 120,000 additional jobs within the city before 2051.
Right, and just building on that, what types of housing units will need to be planned in the existing neighborhoods and built boundary for this 2051 targets to be made?
So our calculations presently identify a need for the growth to 2051 within our urban area to be approximately 78% apartment units, 13% townhouses, and about 9 to 10% lower density or single semi-detached housing. And again, that's within our urban area. Those numbers, though, do require some further refinement as we work through over the next year of finalizing our intensification strategy and determining how the city will be accommodating those 110,000 units within our urban area. So there might be some fluctuation there, but it does give you a general idea of the unit breakdown that we will see going forward.
Okay, excellent. And I'm just, before I jump to another kind of topic area, okay, there are some questions coming in tonight. I'm going to do a couple more on this housing topic area, just so we don't jump around too much. Does the city have information on the recommendations that are coming out of the Provincial Housing Task Force? And how will these recommendations be incorporated, if at all, into this process?
Yeah, so for those on the meeting who aren't aware, there was a report recently released just last week called the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force Report. And it was a report that was prepared by a task force that had been assembled by the provincial government to bring forward recommendations for increasing the supply of affordable housing within the province. So the task force was the report was just released last week, so it is still fairly fresh. And to date, we as a municipality don't have any information on how any of those recommendations may be implemented, or if any of those recommendations may be implemented. It was a report to the provincial government. That being said, we are reviewing it and we'll determine if we need to provide formal comments to the province on any of those recommendations. I can say that one of the key recommendations that came out of the task force was a recommendation that we increase the range of housing types permitted in our low density residential areas up to 4 units, which is consistent with what we're proposing through our amendments right now. So there certainly is some consistency with what we are proposing, but we do have to do some further review of that document to address. There's about 55 recommendations in all, so there's a lot in there. And as I said, we're not really sure about implementation going forward, what the provincial plan is on that side.
Okay. And are there any plans for houses or properties that are sitting empty or have been sitting empty, to work those into a plan for affordable housing, for example? And this would also include other types of derelict buildings and properties. And, how are those being considered within this context?
It's a good question. So the city, we as a municipality can put measures in place to encourage the redevelopment of those properties, and we've done a lot of that already through flexible zoning permissions, et cetera, that allow for some of these vacant properties to be redeveloped and used for other uses. But it is up to a property owner to actually initiate redevelopment plans. I do know, though, that the city recently has announced investigating the vacant residential tax, if approved by province, which might provide for some more incentive for some property owners of these vacant properties to move to the next step and actually redevelop those. So it is something that we're aware of, that there's potential there, and we're trying to put in place the policies and the zoning to allow that redevelopment to occur. And then other incentives that the city has control over to encourage that to occur. So it is something that is ongoing.
Okay, great. And there are some, I would characterize them as comments, and related to understanding that seniors aren't moving from 3-bedroom homes as there's not enough smaller accessible housing in neighborhoods. There's an opinion expressed, that the housing crisis isn't going to solve itself, and staff through this process should be encouraging those types of developments that you've just been talking about, by doing things like cutting red tape, for example. And I just want to confirm before I wrap up the pre-submitted questions here, that the demographics of the community are being considered within the context of the project.
Yeah, so there is the demographics do feed into the forecast, the population forecast, so determining age structure as we move forward in the planning horizon. So yes, it is considered, and I think some of the amendments that Delia is going to speak to again later in our presentation about additional opportunities for housing types within our neighborhoods does open up those options for seniors in their neighborhoods to age in place and to downsize within the area that they're already living in. So maybe we can touch on that again later in the presentation.
Okay, absolutely. Sounds good. So we'll shift gears a little bit here and go back to that, the land use compatibility piece. And the person who submitted the question is looking for some examples of the land use compatibility requirements that would apply. And do any of them include environmental considerations?
Yes, so the way the policies are worded is there would be a requirement for a land use compatibility study, which would take into when we have that situation of the adjacent uses. And our official plan already does have policies that deal with this, but this is really a way of strengthening them a little bit. And it would consider issues of air quality, noise issues, odor issues potentially, that all could be addressed and fall under that category of that compatibility study.
Okay. And Heather, I should have asked this one before this one, the one you just answered, but are there requirements for a certain percentage of deeply affordable units, which would also be required to be accessible? So is there a percentage for that?
At present, no, this is something that we'll be looking at further as we move along, and that we could look at through what the different ranges of affordability can be looked at through different tools, including, for example, inclusionary zoning as we get to that point. So that's something that's ongoing, but is not addressed currently in these amendments before you today.
Which phase do you think that might come into?
Could be the phase 3, so the local context OPI urban official plan updates, or phase 4 with the major transit station area plan.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
absolutely something that's on our radar. It's priority to address that for the affordable housing crisis, and we're looking at all opportunities and tools that we have before us. So it is something that's identified as a priority, and we're definitely considering how we can address it going forward.
Okay, thank you. Have all of the employment land conversions been determined at this point? If so, how many additional hectares of land will be available for other uses?
So the city's employment land conversion report, which is when we take lands out of an employment area designation and put them into a different designation in our official plan. It was approved by council in August of last year. There are still a few remaining deferral sites where additional information was required before staff could make a recommendation to council. So that information will be coming forward to council in the next couple of months. The recommendations that we've put forward so far and that are approved by council are generally identifying conversion sites where the lands are already developed with other uses. So we're essentially cleaning up and recognizing existing situations where the current employment land designation didn't match what had been developed on the property. So in terms of opening up a significant amount of hectares for additional or other uses, we're not seeing a lot of that, or really any of that through the employment land conversion piece, very little. There are a couple of the outstanding deferrals though, where that would be more of the case. So stay tuned over the next couple of months to see the staff recommendation, the council approval of those recommendations coming forward.
Okay. And following along that employment lands thread, why was the density target for the DGA reduced from 70 to 60 people and jobs per hectare? Boy, this is a subject area just fraught with acronyms and short forms, and it has a language of its own. So go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, there's a lot of acronyms in planning. We try our best to not use them, but sometimes we forget. So just always ask the question if anything's not clear. So yeah, the density target that we've set of 60 persons and jobs per hectare is based on the analysis that we've completed of our designated greenfield areas and the planned or the anticipated development that will take place on those lands. Much of our designated greenfield area, and for those on the call, the designated greenfield area is the portions of our urban area, so lands that are already urban but are undeveloped so far. Much of it is already planned and already has either pending approvals on it or approvals that just haven't been granted, but the development hasn't occurred yet. So there's not a lot of opportunity there to be increasing the density within our designated greenfield area. And so that's why 60 is, after we've looked at the opportunity site, 60 was the target that best reflected the opportunities in the DGA. The 70 persons and jobs per hectare had been a higher target on the residential side when our official plan was first approved to compensate for employment lands, which develop at a lower density. So because it was measured differently back then. So the 70 was a very high target that was put in to compensate for that lower employment land density. The Fruitland Monona area is planned to achieve that 70 persons and jobs per hectare. So there's no change in that. The newer greenfield areas, there is that opportunity to go higher than 60, and we will continue to do that. But 60 is the average over all of our designated greenfield areas, which includes areas where we already have those approvals in place at the lower density. So I hope that makes sense, but that's where that number of 60 lands on, being the average across the DGA area.
Okay, thank you. We're going to look at the Gardner Road wetland property at the headwaters of the Ancaster Creek, where a development proposal was turned down by the Conservation Authority. What is the present zoning there, and will it be removed from the AEGD? So this one may be more appropriate for a later section, but how do you feel, Heather?
Well, it may be. We don't have a specific section on natural heritage tonight. I would have to get back to you to determine. I wouldn't want to give you the wrong answer about what the zoning is on a specific piece of property without having it in front of me. But through this process that we're talking about right now, we're not proposing to remove change any zoning within the Airport Employment Growth District. But again, I wouldn't want to comment on that specific instance or case. So that's certainly something that when we post this question and answer to our website, we can put a little bit more detail in on that answer for you with specifics to that scenario.
Okay, excellent. And my screen is jumping around a little bit here with different types of questions. And just to share with everybody, there was a question here saying that these are very interesting Q's and A's, and can we get copies? And the answer is yes. The presentation will be available on Engage Hamilton in about a week, and will also include a Q&A summary. So Colin, you had posted your questions here. Again, there were 3 of them, and Heather did answer them related to your housing stock questions. So when the recording is posted, at about 40 minutes in, you'll find the responses. So we'll go to the next one then. Is source water protection included as part of the environmental considerations for land use compatibility? Air quality and noise were only mentioned.
Through the specifics of a land use compatibility study, I'm not sure if source water protection would be included as part of that study in particular, which is meant to include more that issue of the relationship between sensitive land uses and industrial or manufacturing uses. So that wouldn't necessarily come into play as part of that study, but certainly source water protection was included in consideration of the importance of that through our development approvals process and through other studies and plans that are required prior to development approvals being granted.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more here, and then we'll go to the next section so we get through everything. Are these policies being tested for feasibility? And it sounds like somebody's suggesting that case studies would be really interesting to see in some of these presentations. So how do the things that you're talking about kind of play out on the ground?
Yeah, to date, we haven't completed case studies as part of this particular round of engagement, or in this first phase of amendment being brought forward. It's not to say that's something that couldn't occur in the future as we get down a little bit more into the nitty gritty of this, the intensification strategy that we'll be working on over the course of the next year, and the planning around our major transit station areas, which is where we would be, which is where we are permitted to include inclusionary zoning tool if we choose to do so as a municipality. And so that's where we really do want to get into that question is it feasible? Are the tools that we're bringing forward feasible from the development side? Are we going to see, the outcomes that we want, or will, what kind of incentives do we have to include in those tools to ensure that we get the development we want, including the factoring in those affordable housing units and what level of affordability and how much do we want to include within those tools going forward. So at present, no, we don't have those case studies, but I do see that that would be something that would come in as part of that future planning when we get more into the details of that affordable housing component.
Okay, excellent. And will there be any impact on built heritage preservation under the Ontario Heritage Act and the resources allocated to maintaining those heritage features?
So we're not proposing any changes in terms of the protection of heritage resources as part of our policy updates. We do have some updates related to cultural heritage, which Delia will get into, but they're not. It's not changing any sort of requirements under the Ontario Heritage Act or removing any levels of protection for our built heritage resources. I think it's fair to say, though, that with the higher levels of intensification that we're planning for, there may be more pressure and more applications that you see coming forward, which could involve a heritage property or be adjacent to a heritage property. But we will use the process that we currently use to evaluate those applications on a case-by-case basis and considering and protecting the heritage resources that we have. So in terms of really the process going forward, there's no change based on what we are proposing here today.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's a good segue into the cultural heritage section. So Delia, welcome back. I just want to comment that there are a couple of questions here that are related to specific parcels of land and development that may or may not have taken place on those in the past. And while they may be burning for an individual, given kind of the big picture nature of the session, I'm going to hold those over for direct interaction with staff on those ones that just involve a single individual property. So go ahead, Delia.
Thank you. So cultural heritage and transportation are the next two topics we would like to highlight. Beginning with cultural heritage. We have proposed the inclusion of the City of Hamilton land acknowledgement at the beginning of the Urban Hamilton official plan to acknowledge the first occupants of this land and to recognize that the city must understand the importance of stewarding this land for future generations. The city and Indigenous communities have a shared interest in land use planning matters and stewardship, so greater emphasis has been added with respect to engagement with Indigenous communities regarding cultural heritage and archaeological resources, as well as the acknowledgement of the spiritual aspect of cultural heritage landscapes. The provincial policy statement definitions of built heritage resource and cultural heritage landscape now specify that an Indigenous community may identify the significance of a heritage resource. Other updates reference current legislation, regulations, and local documents such as the city's archaeological management plan. Moving on now to transportation. The definition of active transportation now recognizes additional transportation modes, including mobility aids. Policy updates prioritize active transportation and encourage the city to work with other municipalities to ensure a seamless integration of active transportation networks across municipal jurisdictions. The provincial policy framework makes a more clear connection between active transportation and public health with a complete streets approach for the safety of all users, supporting placemaking opportunities and allowances for other emerging design trends. Policy updates also include references to a public transportation network that adapts to a changing climate and reduces greenhouse gas emissions with multi-use pathways, trails, and bicycle lanes. And finally, policy updates also include prioritizing transit planning and investment to support priority transit corridors and connections to employment areas. At this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the cultural heritage or transportation topic area updates.
Sure thing. Thanks very much. There is a comment in here, Heather, for you, just in terms of your maybe proximity to your mic. Some people are having trouble hearing you. So maybe if you go closer to your microphone or something, it may be helpful. And I'll monitor the chat for that. So we have a question about bike lanes. And other public transit. Bike lanes and bus tram only lanes on streets are proven ways to reduce traffic in cities while also providing dozens of other benefits, including employment. Has the city considered this within this process?
Okay, I guess I'll take that one again. Tracy, can you hear me okay when I'm speaking?
I can, yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, just give me a signal of some sort if you have trouble hearing me. So yeah, that question is really more related to our transportation master plan and our transportation planning group. The transportation master plan, or the TMP, it does stress the importance of dedicated bike lanes, transit as a priority going forward. The city has been establishing bike lanes throughout the city in all former municipalities. I'm sure most of us have seen the results of that in one area or another. I did connect with our transportation planning staff because this was a question that had come in earlier, and they mentioned that the city would evaluate feasibility of dedicated transit-only lanes for the blast network as part of future updates to the transportation master plan.
Thank you. And to me, you sounded great. But if anybody has trouble still, please pop it in the Q&A. Heather is a critical information provider for us tonight, so we want you to hear her well. So the portion of the presentation where you covered cultural heritage, specifically regarding Indigenous peoples, is there the ability to influence the heritage designation of trails or lands that are in place right now? Or is this a forward-looking piece? And can you elaborate on that?
I'm actually going to let Delia speak to that one, just because she has been our cultural heritage planning expert. So Delia, take it away.
Okay, so in terms of trails, these updates are primarily focused on updating our official plan policies to conform with provincial policies. So in terms of trails, I'm going to say generally, no, we aren't making any changes. However, having said that, perhaps through the local context, you might want to bring that to our attention, or even now, if that's something that you'd like to see, we're taking information from tonight's session and from other comments being provided now to see whether they fit more appropriately now or in the future phases of the official plan review. So I would encourage you, if you have specific portions, say, of the Bruce Trail that, for example, or another trail, for example, that you submit those comments and we will review and confirm whether or not it's appropriate for this time or perhaps in the future phase 3 local context.
Okay, thanks. And we have a couple of questions around LRT, which fit nicely in this section. Hamilton's LRT stops are already fixed, as are the GO stations. Why is there a delay until Q2 2023 to designate the protected major transit station areas, affectionately known as PMTSAs?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. So it is a couple of reasons. So we are in contact with our colleagues in other sections of the city to rely on them to kind of provide us the green light, for lack of a better word, that we should proceed with this work based on the stage of the LRT project. And as of right now, we're still in a little bit of a holding pattern pending some more information as the project moves forward. But in addition to that, it is a resource issue as well. The LRT project was, as you know, on hold for quite some time and has recently been resurrected, which is fantastic. But we do need the time now to go through and do the planning of each major transit station area along the corridor. We had done preliminary work delineating the LRT stations and doing some density calculations in those areas, but we need to now go through and pick up that work, which had been on hold for quite some time. And so that is going to take us time to pick up that work and get it to a point where we can confidently identify what we feel to be the planned densities for each of those major transit station areas and do the significant amount of other work that we need to do as a city if we choose to proceed to identify those areas as protected major transit station areas and lay the groundwork for inclusionary zoning. So it does take time, and that's what we will be working on over the course of the next year or so. But that is the answer to that question.
Thank you. And what sort of densities are likely to emerge along the blast network corridors?
Sorry, I just was reading the question there too. So we'd be looking to achieve transit supportive densities along all of the blast network corridors, and that is where we identify a significant amount of our growth going forward. Assuming that a significant amount of that intensification growth is going to be planned for those nodes and corridors, about 40% of our intensification growth overall. The corridors themselves would vary somewhat. The blast network, you won't see the same densities across all of them, but we would be looking to achieve higher transit supported densities for all of the blast network areas. The LRT corridor itself, we're required to plan for a minimum density of 160 persons and jobs per hectare, so that's the target, unless we get an alternative approved by the province. And for the other portions of the corridor, there's no provincial target, but we would just be as a city planning to achieve higher densities along those areas in order to be transit supportive.
Okay, thank you. Bob, I just want to acknowledge your comment regarding the Indigenous trails that are existing in the areas of Old Dundas, Wilson, and Rousseau. So yeah, thank you. And that sort of feeds into what Delia was saying for people to kind of provide their perspectives and ideas in that regard. So I just wanted you to know we are in receipt of that information. And now the next one I think is a good segue into the next section. I'm going to hold over the waste management question we have to the infrastructure section, which is next. But in terms of a bridge question, is the elimination of parking minimums under serious consideration as part of achieving climate change mitigation and transportation goals and objectives?
Hi there, this is Shannon Mackay. I'm the manager of zoning and committee of adjustment. And I think this is directed at a zoning conversation. So I'll give Heather a break here for a minute. With all of the recent major zoning changes that the city has moved forward with, we have evaluated parking for each of the different components of zoning bylaw 05200 as we've implemented the different categories. And at each stage of that process, we have evaluated parking, and where possible, we have already made significant reductions, especially most recently in the downtown area, where we have provided some elimination of parking requirements for some uses and significant reductions. And I think that mentality would move forward as we progress into the residential zoning stage with the new residential zoning review, which is ongoing kind of simultaneously, but separate to this process right now. So yes, we are considering the reductions and how that would be implemented in the zoning bylaw as we progress through the final stages of our new zoning bylaw 05200.
Thank you. And just to jump back quickly before we go forward here, Heather, can you just confirm whether the aim for the DGAs is 60 people jobs per acre?
Yeah, it's Tracy, per hectare. So yeah, the target is 60 persons and jobs per hectare. But again, I just want to confirm, so that's an average over the entire designated greenfield area. It doesn't preclude the city from encouraging and planning for higher densities in individual greenfield areas through individual development applications. As I mentioned, the Fruitland Winona area, which is our largest residential greenfield area, is planned at a higher density of 7 persons and jobs per hectare. And I noticed the comment says that the DJs are blank canvases, and I would suggest that that's not true, as much of our designated greenfield area is already planned and has draft plan approvals or registered plan approvals already in place on those lands.
Okay, we do have some more questions rolling in, but let's see here. I guess this one does speak to community character, so we'll take this now and then we are going to move on. Okay. Do you feel that all of the future growth to 2051 can be accommodated in the existing urban area? What kind of community character in terms of housing mix and supporting open space, community services, amenities, schools, and other infrastructure would need to be provided to accommodate all this growth in the existing urban area? It's kind of a catch-all question. What do we need to do to accomplish this growth forecast?
Yeah, that's a big question. In terms of can all of the growth be accommodated within our existing urban area? So that is the council has approved the city's preferred growth scenario, and the preferred growth scenario is to accommodate all of our growth within the existing urban area to 2051. And so that is what we are aiming to do as a first step toward ensuring that we can implement that council decision through these official plan amendments. And again, Delia will get into this a little bit more in the next couple of topic areas, some more specifics to this. But in terms of, I'm just reading the question again, community character in terms of housing mix and supporting open space. I think again, as you see when Delia speaks to this, we are proposing to add additional opportunities for intensification throughout our neighborhoods, which I think is a very good thing. I think there's opportunities within our neighborhoods for intensification and to add a little bit of a mix that we don't always see within some of our neighborhood areas. So in terms of that community character, we will start to see some more housing mix, and I think that's positive. I think where challenges will occur is ensuring that we can provide the necessary infrastructure to support the intensification that is planned for, and that's something that the city will be looking at as we go forward. And by infrastructure, I mean hard and soft. So park space, amenity space, ensuring that the people who move into these communities at this higher density have everything they need to enjoy a complete community within this higher density environment that we'll be planning for. So these are questions that we are still tackling, and that we, not just in planning, but as a city, will be tackling through master planning exercises going forward, including parks master planning and other infrastructure master plans and recreation master plans. So there's a lot that's the city is planning, and a lot of I think positive steps that we've taken as we move forward through our process to implement this intensification and this preferred growth scenario. But there are challenges as well. So that's something that we'll be looking for feedback on going forward. And as Delia mentioned, there's further amendments that will be coming down the road. This is our first crack at making sure that we can identifying how we can implement that growth scenario to accommodate all of that growth within our urban area, but there will be further updates required, and we'll be looking for community feedback on that.
Thanks, Heather. And you gave the perfect segue word, which was infrastructure. So Delia, if you want to jump in here, that is the next subject area, or part of the next subject area. Over to you.
Thank you. The next two topic areas we'd like to focus on include climate-related and infrastructure. Policy updates within the climate-related topic area include preparing for the impacts of a changing climate, including assessment of infrastructure risks, vulnerabilities, and impacts of extreme weather, the incorporation of energy conservation techniques for municipally owned facilities, and the use of low-impact development techniques of green infrastructure, amongst others. Reference to the city's corporate policies and plans related to climate mitigation and adaptation that have been adopted by Council are included in the updates, as well as updated targets to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. However, these targets are also expected to be updated further once Council endorses the city's Community Energy and Emissions Plan anticipated later this year. In terms of infrastructure, policy updates that complement those under the climate-related topic area are complemented, and they include the introduction of green infrastructure such as green roofs, low-impact development techniques, and green spaces to reduce the impacts of a changing climate. Reference is also made to the preparation and update of an urban forest strategy, which is currently in process. Other updates include optimizing existing infrastructure and community services and facilities, as well as promoting the adaptive reuse of existing infrastructure and community services and facilities. Updated requirements related to the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater master plans are also included. Finally, there is an existing policy within the official plan that the city may allow existing lots that and existing uses that front onto rural urban boundary roads to connect to existing municipal water and wastewater systems subject to conditions. However, recent updates to the Niagara Escarpment Plan prohibits the extensions to lands within the Escarpment Natural, Escarpment Protection, and Escarpment Rural designations. Therefore, an update is required to the official plan to ensure its conformity with the Niagara Escarpment Plan. At this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the climate-related or infrastructure topic area updates.
Super, thank you. And I'm going to bring in the question that was asked in the last segment related to infrastructure. The person was asking about waste management, and given all of this growth that's anticipated, how will that work vis-a-vis the landfill site, waste reduction initiatives, and are there any alternative methods of waste management being considered?
I could answer that question. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the details of our waste management processes at the local level will be considered in the future Phase 3 local context. So the infrastructure updates that we have to our Urban Hamilton official plan is focused on responding to updates to provincial land use planning policy updates related to infrastructure. So at the future local context stage, we will be considering waste management processes and how we can increase efficiencies, etc.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to Delia, you'd mentioned the Community Energy and Emissions Plan, and there's some interest in that, just whether you have any additional details that you can provide.
Thanks, Tracy. Or Christine, I don't know. Did you want to speak to that one?
Well, I can add on, Heather, if you are going to address something.
Yeah, I was
just
going to say that. So that the Community Energy and Emissions Plan is a plan that's in process and in the works within our planning division. Actually, also under Christine's group, and it's been in process for some time, and we anticipate that a draft will be brought forward in the next couple of months to GIC or Planning Committee, one or the other. The report will be asking permission to proceed to the public consultation phase on that draft Community Energy and Emissions Plan. So stay tuned for that in the very near future, and also opportunities for consultation on that Community Energy and Emissions Plan in the near future as well.
Thanks. And I'll just also add in that there's also the community adaptation or climate adaptation plan process going on right now as well. That is on a different timeline than the community energy and emissions plan, which will be going for a draft version will be going to council, as Heather mentioned. The adaptation plan is aiming for, I believe, in the summer. But we can provide websites and links for people to access that information and follow those projects at the same time.
Thank you. There sure is a lot going on. Never a dull moment. So flooding, how will flood forecasts and hydrologic modeling be integrated into this land use planning before approvals are granted for the developments that are anticipated?
So as part of our standard development approvals process, we do engage with and work with conservation authorities on any projects where there is the flooding is an issue, particularly within the regulated areas. So that will continue to be the case, and we rely on our conservation authority partners to assist us with that, the assessment of flood risk when it's undertaken. So, and also, of course, within those areas, permits are required from conservation authorities before development approvals are granted. So that will continue to be the case.
Okay, and will the existing infrastructure, such as the sewers and the water that you spoke about earlier, will they be able to support these proposed increases in density, specifically in the downtown core area?
So that's something that's being reviewed within the water and wastewater and stormwater master plan, which is ongoing right now, the update to the existing master plans. So that's something that will, through that process, upgrades will be identified, or required upgrades to be able to accommodate this level of intensification will be identified. And we do work in partnership with that group by providing them the data that they need in terms of anticipated population and job growth within these areas, including the downtown, so that they can run that through their models and identify where there's constraint areas or other red flag areas, and where infrastructure upgrades are required, and then the phasing of those upgrades. So that's an ongoing process, and we can certainly direct you to the contacts who are in our public works department who are running that project.
Okay, and will green buildings, low LIDs for new development applications be prioritized?
Sorry, I was just looking for that one. Sorry, can you read that one again, Tracy?
Sure. The question is, and it's kind of, my screen is going lots of entries at this point in time, which is great. The question is, are green buildings going to be prioritized?
So in terms of prioritizing, I don't have the answer to that. I see Shannon's come on. We are looking and working on green development standards to assist and facilitate within our development approvals process. But I'm going to pass it over to Shannon to see if she has any more information on that piece.
Kind of stole my thunder, Heather. We are working on a few different design standards and updating our current urban design standards, which would include an update for green standards for low density residential developments and incorporating green standards for other forms of residential. So that'll be coming, I believe, at the end of this year, hopefully, in terms of an updated document that would provide additional guidance and support through our development application process.
Thank you. Let's see here. Considering the growth plan spans over a long period of time, 29 years to be exact, and a lot can change, will there be periodic reviews to ensure that the forecasted growth can be sustained?
Yes, yeah, the answer to that is yes. At both the provincial and the municipal level, there will be reviews. There will be updated forecasts, growth forecasts provided at the provincial level. I believe they've committed to do that every 5 years. And then we are also required to update our official plan every 5 years following the release of those forecasts and any other provincial plan updates. So yes, there will be monitoring and updates as we go forward at multiple times prior to reaching that 2051 ultimate planning horizon.
Okay, let's do a couple kind of rapid fire ones so we can get through them, and then we'll go on to the next section. How are streetscapes, kind of the shifted thinking in urban design, how are they going to be effectively addressed with this intensification?
I'm not sure, Shannon, if you wanted to step in on that a little bit with some of the work that's been being undertaken on, again, the green standards and then also updated site plan guidelines that might speak to this issue somewhat.
Like I said, we are working on an updated urban design standards that would ultimately replace our current site plan guidelines. And the focus there is on streetscape improvements. And so that is currently under review and would be implemented at a later date, but it would be reinforced by the policies that are already within the Urban Hamilton official plan and along with the policies that are being updated through this process. The green standards similarly would be implemented to enhance that development application review and to be implemented through applications as we're seeing them implement the policies that are being revised.
Okay. Are there opportunities for constraints and opportunities mapping such that development could be encouraged specifically in areas where there are fewer constraints?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it is something that we're looking at with our colleagues in Public Works who are doing that master plan, those master plan updates, and looking specifically at that as we think about phasing of growth. So we know our growth pattern our growth numbers out to 2051, but in terms of breaking that down at a finer level to plan out to 2031 and then 2041 and 2051, we will be working with our colleagues in Public Works to identify how infrastructure constraints can help us shape that phasing of growth plan. The same with transportation constraints is another item that we would be looking at.
Okay, and lastly, will the water and wastewater master plan update protocols include resilience strategies that prevent combined sewer overflow spills that are not detected immediately, like the ones at Main and King?
That is something that I would need to get in touch with our Public Works colleagues, and then we can answer that one at a later date through the Q&A posted on the website.
Okay, sounds good. And there is another question in here about DGAs, but as they relate more closely to the growth management piece, we'll hold that one over to the next section. So please go ahead.
Okay, so let's move on now to the final topic areas, which include growth management, firm urban boundary, and urban structure topic areas. We will also highlight the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the zoning bylaws of the former communities to apply to lands outside secondary plan areas. These topic areas have been grouped together because some of the updates relate directly to Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Under the growth management topic area, policy updates include reference to Our Future Hamilton, which is the city's 25-year community plan that reflects the values and aspirations of Hamiltonians, as well as references to Grids 2, the city's growth strategy to accommodate population and job growth to the year 2051. Updates also include revised growth plan population and employment growth targets, intensification targets, policies affirming that the city will accommodate all new housing units within the existing urban area, and that only at the time of municipal comprehensive review will any possible adjustments be made to the urban boundary, provided there is no net increase in land area. So if all development is to occur within the existing urban area, amendments to the Rural Hamilton official plan are necessary. These updates include policy reference to a firm urban boundary, the inclusion of a policy that specialty crop and rural lands may not be redesignated for non-agricultural purposes, which is similar to one already in place prohibiting conversion of agricultural land, and the deletion of Special Policy Area B, Elfrida, the future urban growth node known as Elfrida. Policy updates under the urban structure topic area include the introduction of policies describing major transit station areas as strategic growth areas, Intensification and higher density mixed uses in a transit supportive and compact built form shall be encouraged and promoted in these areas. Intensification, redevelopment in compact form throughout the urban area. The addition of fourplexes and multiple dwellings up to a maximum of 6 dwelling units within low-density residential areas without the need for an official plan amendment. And updates to the residential density range policies within the neighborhood's designation as a measure to be used for the purpose of preparing secondary plans and master plans only, and not to be applied on a site-by-site basis. This policy change is intended to increase flexibility and facilitate development approvals without the need for an official plan amendment related to density only. Additional policies to ensure compatibility with adjacent uses have also been added. The following list highlights the policy updates related to the Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Focusing on the urban Hamilton official plan, increased intensification and density targets are referenced. For example, the city's intensification target has increased from 40 to 80%, and the downtown urban growth center density target has increased from 250 to 500 people and jobs per hectare. Urban boundary expansion policies have been removed, and the addition of a policy prohibiting urban boundary expansions in advance of the next Municipal Comprehensive Review has been added, and amendments to Chapter E3 Neighborhoods to permit a broader range of uses in low-density residential areas and added flexibility to residential density categories. In order to implement the official plan policy updates to support all projected population and employment growth within the existing urban area, amendments to the zoning bylaws of the former communities are necessary. At this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to Alana Fulford, planner within the zoning reform team, to highlight the proposed updates to the zoning bylaws of the former communities.
Thank you, Delia. So, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the zoning bylaws are the primary mechanism to implement the policies of official plans. In the City of Hamilton, zoning bylaw 05200 is the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw, which applies citywide. However, as has been mentioned, there are still the zoning bylaws of the former communities, Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, the former City of Hamilton, and Stony Creek. The residential zones in these zoning bylaws still apply in each former community. In order to implement Council's growth management strategy, which has informed the proposed policy changes to the Urban Hamilton official plan, as discussed in the presentation tonight, modifications are proposed to the zoning bylaws of the former communities. So small-scale intensification opportunities are proposed for the city's low-density areas to implement Council's approval of a no urban boundary expansion growth option and the resulting draft policy changes to the Urban Hamilton official plan. And so, as has been discussed, in speaking of low-density areas, those are the neighborhoods across the city, which are predominantly made up of single detached dwellings. Providing more opportunities for intensification in low-density areas may be achieved by allowing a broader range of housing types in these areas. So in addition to single detached dwellings, that would be permitting semi-detached dwellings, duplex dwellings, triplexes and fourplexes, and street townhouses. Between all 6 former community zoning bylaws, there are a lot of existing low-density residential zones. It actually numbers over 40. And a fair number of these existing low-density residential zones only permit single detached dwellings. So this broader range of housing types would be permitted in these zones. And it is this form of small-scale intensification that is proposed to implement Council's direction. I do want to note that at this time, we are proposing to permit triplexes and fourplexes through conversions only. So meaning adding units within existing dwellings. And a mix of housing types and neighborhoods provides small-scale intensification opportunities and housing choices for residents. And I want to take a moment to talk briefly right now about the proposed changes in the context of the city's residential zoning project, which many of you may be aware of, and it has been touched on briefly through previous comments. The residential zoning project is ongoing, and it is a comprehensive zoning project which will introduce new residential zones to zoning bylaw 05200. These new residential zones will replace the existing residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws. So the result is that there will be one set of residential zones citywide instead of the over 40 residential zones that presently exist for the low density in the low density areas. And they will have a common set of zoning regulations. Staff have been actively working on phase 1 of the project, which will introduce new low density residential zones to 05200. With Council's approval of no urban boundary expansion growth option, the changes being presented today to expand the housing types permitted in low density areas is an interim step to implement Council's direction. And it is an interim step in a few ways, in that the changes are proposed to the low density residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws, whereas new residential zones in 05200 will ultimately replace these zones. And an interim in that it will inform the residential zoning project going forward, which is a comprehensive undertaking to evaluate and recommend new residential zones and zoning regulations for the entire city. The residential zoning project is a public process, so once phase 1 of the project is complete, the draft low density residential zones will be presented to the public for consultation. So now I'll turn it back over to Delia, who will lead us through our final topic area Q&A.
At this time, we'd like to answer any questions you may have about the growth management, firm urban boundary, or urban structure topic area updates, or the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaws for the former communities.
Okay, thank you. Question 1 was submitted before the session, and it is, can there be a mix between rural and urban growth instead of only focusing the growth in the urban areas?
I guess that one's not mine. The answer to that is no. The council has made the decision to focus all of our growth until 2051 within the existing urban area. A very, very small amount of infill development within existing rural settlement areas like Carlisle or Greensville, which would only account for a few hundred units. All of our remaining growth will be focused within the existing urban area, and that is a decision that council has already made. So we are implementing that decision through these amendments.
Okay, Heather, I think this question here segues nicely into your response. And it says, while councils voted to keep the urban boundary firm, there is still ongoing consideration of a boundary expansion in Waterdown into the Greenbelt. And how can the public view the expansion applications that are currently under consideration? And what are the timelines for how the consideration of that expansion would unfold?
So staff will report back on expansion requests in Waterdown when we bring back the final official plan amendment, and when we release the updates to our official plan amendment and prior to the statutory open house. So there will be opportunity for public review of the results of the Waterdown, any expansion from the Waterdown area. Council did reduce opportunities for expansion from Waterdown to a maximum of 5 hectares of land, of which a maximum of 50% of that can be for residential purposes, which results in many of the requests that had come in being screened out from consideration in accordance with the evaluation tool that we had presented to council back in August of 2021. for how we would evaluate any requests that came in the Waterdown area. So it is a process that we're still ongoing, that we're looking at those requests, but due to the restrictions placed by council on the size of any expansion from Waterdown, it does scope down the opportunities for expansion in that area considerably.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here about when staff will be bringing forward a timeline and plan to take advantage of the new community benefits charges, which was formerly Section 37 related to bonusing, and that's part of Bill 108.
So I can start on this one. I'm not sure if Christine wants to jump in. The city is currently working on the community charges benefit charge bylaw. That is something that's being led by staff in our finance department. So I don't know the exact timing of when they anticipate having a draft bylaw available for public consultation, but I do know that it will be subject to public consultation. I believe it will be sooner rather than later, because I believe there is a provincial timeline that has to be met for bringing forward that community benefit charge bylaw. But again, we'd have to check in with our finance colleagues to get exact dates on when that consultation would be planned. So again, that's something that we can provide a little bit more detail when we post the Q&A online.
Okay. I think this question relates back to what we were talking about before this one, but if developer plans are already in, will they be given an opportunity to add more density to those plans?
Yes, I believe I saw this one in the chat, and it was specifically related to the DGA question.
DGA, yeah.
Again, because we do have a lot of draft approved or registered plans. Certainly if a developer or property owner wants to open up an application and submit for a revision, they do have that opportunity to do so. It would require going through the process of being reviewed by all departments and divisions, and seeing what updates to approvals and or draft plan conditions would be required to facilitate that change in plan or that increase in density. But yes, it is an option, but it would be developer driven.
Okay, and following along with that, earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned the new official plan proposing certain percentages of different types of residential units, 78% apartments, 13% towns, and 9% singles is what's written here. Will this high percentage of apartment construction and the small percentage of ground-related single-family homes comply with the provincial growth plan policy of more homes, more choices?
I guess that's really a question at the provincial level. We will be submitting, we've submitted our draft official plan amendment to the province for review at this stage. I think Delia is going to speak a little bit more about process. In draft form, once this official plan amendment is approved by our city council, it does require again, it will go back to the province for final approval at the provincial level. So the province will approve it if they deem it to be compliant with the provincial growth plan. We are doing our best to, through this amendment, show that we are putting in a strategy to make it work, to make that intensification rate work, to provide housing options within our neighborhoods. Might be different than what we've seen in the past, but it's something that can work. So we are doing our best to show and to indicate to the province how we can make this work, but ultimately it will be up to the province to deem it to be compliant with the growth plan and to issue that approval.
Okay, thank you. How did the city staff determine the residential unit allocations across the urban neighborhoods and the downtown growth center nodes and corridors? How was all of that determined?
Yeah, so that's determined in different ways by looking at applications that are already in process, formal consultation or other consultations that we've had where we have an indication that development is going to be forthcoming, doing an analysis and looking at vacant or underutilized parcels throughout our urban area where we might anticipate redevelopment potential. And then on a broader approach, beyond that, when we get to the point where it gets a little bit harder, as we get later into the planning period, it becomes much more difficult to anticipate exactly where development will occur or will not. Earlier in the period, it's much easier because we do have those in-process applications and sites that are a little bit more obvious for redevelopment. So at that point, it became an exercise in implementing direction of our official plan, which tells us to focus our development within our downtown, within our other nodes and corridors. And so working in relation to our existing secondary plan policies and allocating growth in a manner that would help us meet those secondary plan objectives and meeting those density objectives of our official plan.
Okay, thank you. And do you think, or will council be considering new applications for higher density development in advance of approval of this OP? Official plan revisions.
Sorry, I was just trying to read that one. Can you read that again one more time, Tracy?
It's right down at the bottom.
Okay.
Knowing the direction of council, will new applications for higher density development be considered in advance of the approval that are being sought through this process?
I mean, applications can commit at any time, right? So applications can be submitted and made at any time and will be brought before council once staff have had the opportunity to review them and bring forward a staff recommendation. I cannot comment on council's decision for these applications and how much they will take into regard the no urban boundary expansion decision in making their determination. All I can say is that property owners are free to submit their applications at any time and they will be considered as per our development review process.
Okay, Heather, there's a couple of questions here that are sort of similar related to the conversion piece. And the question is, will triplexes and fourplexes come about through conversions only? And does this mean no new triplexes or quadplexes?
I can answer that. So as was indicated, these measures and these proposals are an interim step only to implement council's decision. So while that is the proposal at this time, that triplexes and fourplexes would be through conversions only, this is in consideration of implementing these measures in the existing former community zoning bylaws. The intent, however, through the residential zoning project that is ongoing concurrently, is that obviously we would be doing a full analysis and evaluation to introduce new residential zones with the appropriate associated zoning regulations. And so this is really intended as an interim step, and it's not indicative of where we are headed in terms of introducing new residential zones to 05200.
Thank you. When new units in these conversions become available in low density homes that may be rented, will the city require units to be licensed legal units?
Well, with these zone changes, they are permitted. So it's not an issue of not being legal. So they are a permitted use. And at that point, subject to all of the zoning regulations in that zone and subject to the requirements of a building permit.
And I'd just like to add that the zoning bylaw doesn't regulate tenure. So whether a house or houses or units within a house are rented or owned. A zoning bylaw doesn't regulate that kind of thing. And so I believe simultaneously the city is contemplating short-term rental licensing processes, and that's currently under review with our licensing section within the city. But as it relates to a zoning bylaw, we don't regulate for tenure, and so that would not be built into the regulations.
Okay. And I think carrying on the flow here, if somebody purchases a house in the next few years, will they know beforehand what they're allowed to build on the property as far as secondary dwellings? They're using the term secondary dwellings, but maybe think a bit more broadly in terms of the response. Will people know what's allowed on those properties?
So that is the kind of the point behind a zoning bylaw, is to give to outline all the permissions and regulations that are allowed for a property. So yes, before you purchase a home, you know, during due diligence, we suggest looking at the zoning and confirming with the city what uses are permitted on the property. And then you could confirm, you know, if there's additional potentials beyond, say, what exists on the day. So if it is a single family dwelling that exists now, whether or not there's permissions to convert that or add a secondary dwelling unit to the property, that would all be built into the zoning bylaw permissions.
Thank you. And Shannon, maybe this one is for you again. Has there been any consideration for providing incentives to residential landowners to, or who intensify? So they're converting that single family dwelling to a triplex, for example.
I don't know of any incentive programs that have been created to address this. I know there's been some measures taken with regards to secondary dwelling units in terms of development charges and parkland dedication reductions. So there could be measures that are implemented, but at this point, I don't believe that there's anything proposed.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, there's a fairly specific question about Alfreda here. And is any part going to be considered part of the urban boundary?
Based on council's no urban boundary expansion growth decision, no, there is no part of Alfreda that would be considered part of the urban boundary. Provided the province does approve ultimately this the official plan amendment and approves that council direction, then no, Alfreda would not be coming into the urban boundary through this municipal comprehensive review process.
Thank you. And so, Delia, I think we can go to the next section, which is section 3, our next steps area.
Okay, so now let's take a few moments for concluding remarks and next steps. For the next few weeks, the city will continue to engage in early consultation with the public on the proposed draft Urban Hamilton Official Plan and Rural Hamilton Official Plan amendments to receive initial feedback from the public and stakeholders on the proposed updates. We have updated project web pages, posted notices at libraries, and we will continue to advertise in newspapers and on social media platforms, seeking input from the public on proposed updates. The city will host one more virtual public open house next Tuesday afternoon, which will provide the same information as this evening's presentation. In addition, we will also be hosting targeted meetings with stakeholders, Indigenous community members, and others. Statutory engagement is that which is required by the Planning Act, whereas non-statutory engagement is the additional consultation with the community for the benefit of finalizing the amendments. Following the province's 90-day review period of the draft official plan amendments, the city will host a statutory open house and statutory public meeting as per the Planning Act requirements, including newspaper notices. This slide indicates the next steps in the work plan for this first phase of the official plan review. The city has commenced the non-statutory public consultation on the proposed amendments, which will continue into March. Once the ministerial 90-day review period has ended, the city will provide notice of statutory open house and statutory public meeting to be held in late April and early May, respectively. Following Council adoption of the official plan amendments, we will forward the official plan amendments to the Minister for approval. This work plan ensures that the City meets the province's July 1st deadline for conformity amendments. If you would like to learn more about the official plan review project, updates on the current MCR component, as well as topic areas to be considered in future phases, we would encourage you to visit the official plan review webpage. A recent update to the official plan review webpage is the addition of a track changes version of the proposed updates to the official plans so that you may review current and proposed policy amendments. Also, you can check out the Grids 2 Municipal Comprehensive Review webpage to learn more about the steps involved in developing and completing the city's strategy for accommodating future population and employment growth. We have also referenced links to the city's current urban and rural Hamilton official plan web pages, where you may access current official plan policies and mapping. At this point, I would like to turn it back over to Tracy for concluding remarks.
Okay, I do have concluding remarks, but I also have a couple of questions that have rolled in here. So I'm wondering whether staff would be happy to entertain those. And I don't see anybody saying no, so we'll just go ahead just so we can, in fact, get through the questions that were submitted. We have about 8 or so minutes here. So the first one is, would conversion only not limit a significant amount of infill intensification? And when would this, when is the earliest this would be implemented?
Well, as was indicated, this is that is considered an interim measure, and we are actively working on the phase 1 of the residential zoning project, which will introduce those low-density residential zones. In terms of a timeline, Shannon, I don't know if you want to respond on that piece.
Sure. As Alana had indicated, that the amendments that are proposed for the zoning bylaws for the former communities are a result of the policy changes being proposed for the OPA, or the official plan amendment. So as a result, the enforcement of the zoning bylaw can't occur until the official plan amendment has received final approval. And so we'd be going forward with the proposed zoning bylaw amendment changes once that has occurred.
Thank you. And there's a question here about the Ontario Land Tribunal and having the ultimate say in some of these development applications and what will be built. How will the city ensure that whatever the zoning and bylaws introduce, that developers will in fact conform to them and not present proposals that are well and above those density targets?
As Heather had indicated before, anyone can make an application, and that has a statutory process and approval process, and then also an appeal process to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So, I mean, we set up the policies and the zoning framework, but anyone can make that application to make amendments to that and go through the council process and public process to have a decision made on that. So the Ontario Land Tribunal, or OLT, you know, is an appeal right that is founded in the Planning Act and does not get eliminated as a result of these policy changes.
Thank you. And then lastly, when do you expect to hear back from the province? You've laid out kind of the timeline for submission, and when do you expect to hear back?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned before that we have submitted the official plan amendment as a draft version to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for their review already. So that went to them in January. Council gave us the direction to do that. They have 90 days to look at it in draft form and provide us any comments that they wish on that draft, the draft amendment. We're not sure what, if any, level of comments we'll get at this draft stage. The province isn't obligated to comment on our draft official plan amendment. Their only obligation ultimately is to consider the amendment once it goes to them in final form after our council has approved the official plan amendment at the local level. So we may receive some feedback from the province during this draft phase. And if we do, we would report back on that in our staff report to council. If not, then we'd be anticipating to hear from the province following submission of our official plan amendment, which we are targeting to get to them before that July 1st deadline. And then the province does have a window of 120 days to review that amendment and issue a decision.
Okay, thank you for that and all of the responses. I want to thank Jody, who has been monitoring the Q&A box here and has been pointing out when I've missed some questions. So I think we've been through all of them in one way, shape, or form, maybe not precisely how they were asked and sometimes combined with others. But you can look forward to a Q&A document being produced with responses from city staff. You can also look forward to the presentation and the recording being posted on the Engage Hamilton website for this particular project. And like happens to me all the time, I leave these meetings and then I have my best ideas. And so when that happens, if that happens for you, you can contact the long range planning staff at grids2-mcr@hamilton.ca at any time, and your comments, input, ideas, questions will be incorporated and or answered. If you're interested in joining back again, the next session will be happening next Tuesday afternoon. Maybe it'll be a lunchtime session from 1:30 to 3:30. You are more than welcome to join then. I want to thank all of the city staff for your wonderful responses and presentations. And mostly a big thank you to members of the Hamilton community that shared your time with us this evening. And with that, we will draw the session to a close with our gratitude to one and all. Sorry, there is, in terms of a deadline for the comments, Heather, could you just pop on and give a response to that? Is there a deadline for the comments? Oh, except you're on mute. I'm so glad you got to do that at least once during the session. It's not
Has to
complete
happen once.
unless it happens. Yes.
I was actually going to ask Lauren, if she doesn't mind. Lauren, was there a deadline put on the Engage Hamilton page for comments on the draft amendments? Do you recall?
So I'm here. On Engage Hamilton, we were looking at March 8th was when we were going to be closing the survey down for that, or the comment section down for that.
Okay. So March 8th, please jump on over to engage.hamilton.ca/grids2mcr and follow up on any information that you did not provide or think about subsequent to this session. And again, thanks to one and all. Have a great evening, safe travels, and good health to everybody.